Welcome back. This is Kevin Berta with Top Shelf Aquatics, and we're here to do an update here with the Red Sea T1000 store display tank. So we're just going to kind of run through a few of the things we've done so far as tester corals, fish we've added, kind of the procedures that we do for that whole process, and just give you an overall update of where the tank's at. So one of the more unique things about this aquarium is the way I had put together the rock structure. I wanted to try something a little outside the box and different that I had kind of taken from freshwater planted tanks. If you look closely, and you'll be able to see when you kind of get the head-on view, there's actually a perimeter of rock that's in this different section here that's tiered upwards. So we actually have various levels of sand bed, which kind of creates a mounding effect. Now, the way I was able to achieve that is I was actually taking starboard pieces that we cut into island shapes and then did multiple tiers of that and built sort of a retaining wall around it with small little pieces of rock, which you can kind of see here. And that is what kind of achieved the look that we have here and the ability to kind of keep that sand locked up together without having to have real deep pockets of sand, just because I didn't want to have to deal with any anaerobic zones or any of the headaches that kind of come with a deep sand bed, but still kind of achieve that tiered look. The rock itself, you know, is a very branchy structure. Overall, the kind of vision we have with this tank is more of a flowy Euphilia garden. You know, it's definitely a big trend a lot of people are into in the hobby, and being a retail store here where we have customers coming in every day, we really want them to kind of see the stuff that they enjoy the most, and these are some of the most, I would say, fan-friendly corals that we have in the store here. At the stage we're at right now, we're just putting in a handful of corals, mostly testing out different things, dialing in the flow to where we're happy with that, slowly ramping up the lights, and kind of fighting through some of the ugly phases that happen when you're early in a tank, like some of the diatom blooms, which you see on the sand bed here, and you know, some of the other different algae that you can kind of go through when you're starting off a new system. So some of the things we do when we're starting off a new system is we'll actually select a handful of different species of corals just to kind of put testers in and then observe them for a few weeks, see how they do, and you know, kind of come up with a game plan on what the tank's doing for figuring out what we're going to further acclimate. So the first things that went in were actually you know, maybe 3 or 4 Euphilia. After they were doing well, we started putting in more and more color varieties, and we've added a few different mushrooms as well. We've added a few different LPS, like some of the Micromusa lords and some of the button scolies. And actually the most recent addition was a short tentacle plate coral, which is definitely a fun one too that I think you guys are going to love. So in this tank, one of the other things we were doing that was a little different than what you typically see in a large display tank is actually trying to create more of a community of small nano fish. So if you look in here, some of the first additions that went in were barnacle blennies, some of the different prawn gobies, school of firefish, you know, just very peaceful fish overall for the most part that have a relatively small maximum size. And the idea is to get all these guys in first, let them gain their territories, let them settle in, get real healthy before we start adding in some of the more semi-aggressive fish later that could cause them problems down the road. Eventually, we'll be putting in some tangs and things like that, but that's definitely going to be the last addition to this tank. And we're going to try to start them off real small too to alleviate some of the aggression issues. The next batch of fish is definitely going to include some of my favorite fish, which are anthias. Anthias are some of the most colorful, active fish that you can get in an aquarium, and definitely one that is going to work well with a lot of the open spaces you see here. So one of the other things that we definitely find important when you're acclimating fish is, you know, when you first get them, it's always good to set up a fish quarantine tank or have one in your house, just as a little extra level of protection. I mean, obviously when you're buying it from the store, you can, you know, buy it from a system that's treated with copper and other things to keep them safe. But a lot of times, some of the more sensitive species, it's good to have an observation period where you really get them acclimated to food and fatten them up and get them real healthy and strong, since they've been through a lot of stress during shipping and when they've been you know, caught from the wild and all that process. We actually ran these guys through a QT period, you know, about 3 weeks to a month, just treating them over in the farm where we had a separate isolated tank, ran them through copper treatments and observation, a couple of different baths with formalin just as a preventative for flukes and other parasites and that sort of thing. Now that the fish are ready to come in, I can kind of walk you through acclimation too, which is another thing that's important. It can be quite stressful to just float, net, and throw them in, and a lot of fish can't really handle that abrupt change in salinity. So you really should be drip acclimating your fish overall. That's something I would emphasize for sure. Now, if you look in here, coming from the quarantine tank, we're kept at about a specific gravity of 1.018 to 20. The water in this system was at about 1.02633 or 35 ppt, so definitely an abrupt change if we were to put them in. Essentially what we're trying to do is dilute the water down and slowly bring up the salinity, and then as it fills, we're gonna bail out some of that water so we're not having to remove as much from the display. Usually I'll double the water volume and then cut it in half 2 to 4 times until I get that salinity to about the exact same level that the main display is at. One tip I would recommend if you were keeping some fish like tangs and things like that, or even some of these guys, depending on how long they're going to be in the drip, is running an aerator too. That could definitely benefit for some of the fish that need a little more high oxygen level in that water as well. But most of these guys are pretty bulletproof when it comes to that, and we've been stirring up the water quite a bit and they're doing very well. So should be ready to put these things in here soon. So one of the things that we noticed in here when we first fired this tank up is the pumps, the Core 20s that we had, with 2 of those, it was really running extremely powerful coming out of the lock lines, and it was blowing a lot of the sand off the front, so we kind of had to ramp that down a little bit and divert more flow to the refugium, which was something we were planning on doing anyways. But definitely very strong pumps overall, so we've been very pleased with the performance on those things. Also, we have the MP60 on the end and 240s on the back wall, which again, with an open rock structure like that, is quite a bit of flow. So what we're trying to do with the Euphilia, which does like flow, but it likes more of an intermittent kind of bouncing wave rather than a constant current that can sort of almost pull at the skeleton and long-term create some issues with the coral. So that's another thing, you know, you really got to just play around with. It's really trial and error. You know, you tweak a setting, come back the next day, just really see how things look in the tank. So overall, the lights, we've been very happy with the new Neptune skies. You know, the spectrum seems to do really well with the coral so far, and it hasn't really grown a lot of nuisance algae overall, which has been good. Another recommendation we typically give people is to kind of ramp it up. So it's good to start a little bit lower when it's a newer tank and gradually bring those lights up to your desired par levels once you kind of settle in and you get past more of the ugly phases and you're really trying to dial it in and color up those corals to the best of your ability. And that's another area too where you can kind of tweak spectrum a little bit too, sometimes depending on the species that you're keeping, if you're going to go a little more blue heavy versus a little more white heavy, and that kind of thing. In here, since it's going to be mostly softies and LPS, we're definitely running more on the blue heavy side of things, and you'll see a lot of that reflected in the future videos, which will help promote better coloration in the coral, and we can run a little bit higher par levels in here as well, without frying the stuff as much too, especially down on the bottom where some of those LPS that are a little more light sensitive are going to be. All right, after some time with the acclimation, it looks like the specific gravity is at the same level as the tank, so we're good to put the fish in. If you come over here, you can actually see, you know, they're being treated right now with safety stop, which is just an extra level of protection to help knock off anything that could be carried along with the fish, and we always like to do that as part of our acclimation procedures. I'm going to put them in a little bit of the tank water just to rinse off any of the chemicals so I don't get any of that transferred into the main display. So here's the first batch of fish we're pulling out. You can see there's a few Hector's gobies, McNeil's Assessor, and some barnacle blennies. The barnacle blennies are some of my favorites. They have a lot of personality. You'll see their head just poking out of a rock. But anytime you feed the tank, they just rock it out and just start eating all the fine planktonic foods. So it's definitely a neat fish. You know, something different you don't really see, especially in a large tank like this. You know, the Hector's gobies are another nice one that actually can sometimes nibble on hair algae and help sift sand without creating a huge mess. The Assessor is one that I've always loved just because it's a very unique fish. They'll actually swim upside down and a lot of times hang under the ledges and caves in your aquarium and just add a very kind of unique perspective on the environments they come from in nature. And you know, it's just kind of a cool little variety of different fish here that we're starting off with. So I'm going to go ahead and net these and release them into the main display. A lot of times, if you have some more feisty fish in there, you may want to use an acclimation box or something like that, just so the fish that are actually in the tank get used to some of the new ones, so that way you don't have to worry about some of the more established aggressive fish bullying any of them. There should be plenty of hiding places in there for all these little fish with the style of rock that I had created in there. The different perimeters have all sorts of little micro caves that I had built up piece by piece, just to kind of plan for these fish long term, to give everyone a nice little home and area that they can settle in without having to fight over caves. Red-banded high-fin goby, Yasha Hasha, another barnacle bunny, and some more Hector's gobies too. The Yasha Hasha just has some really crazy coloration. If you look close, it almost looks like a painted clown face. Definitely a very cool fish, and that's another one that can pair with pistol shrimp in the tank along with the red-banded high-fin goby. The last batch, a couple more barnacle bunnies and 2 red-banded high fins as well to wrap this whole batch up. Another thing we like to do a lot of times when we're adding new fish to alleviate some of the aggression and just help them settle in is throw a little food in there just to kind of distract some of the older ones that are settled in, and just sometimes get some of the new ones to start pecking and feel a little bit more settled in while they're, you know, initially trying to find a home and that sort of thing. Well, thanks for tuning in to our update of the T1000 Red Sea display tank here at Top Shelf Aquatics. I appreciate you guys checking us out, and just keep up with us on the next video. There should be some more good content and some good updates as to where this tank's going.